our Old Testament text to Job. And if you've got digital copies of the workbook or things you prepared, you can get those ready as well. We are beginning the look at one of the two sections of Job that are written as prose, as storytelling. The dialogues that take place inside are more poetic in format and structure. And so they are talking about really big issues, but the individuals speaking are using more flowery language. They're talking about pictures and images, even when they're dealing with complicated theological matters or the personal history of Job and the conversation he has with his friends. So at this time then, let's go ahead and begin our class with prayer, and then we'll be looking at the text. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this time we'll share together in study. We thank you for your word, its wisdom that it gives to us. Help us to develop a moral center that is reflective of you as a person. Help us to understand your will and to sort through the complexity of life with careful endeavor and an open heart. And this we pray in your Son's name. Amen. All right, so if you remember last week when we opened up the class together, one of the things that I emphasized was how the biblical text presents Job when we first meet him. We meet him right away in chapter 1, verses 1 through 5, with this heavy, positive description. And we're going to come back to that in a second. But I wanted to kind of remind you, remember those 4 words? We'll talk about those again, each of those phrases that are used at least twice in the text of Job, each of them. But then as the balance to that, on an interpersonal level, on a thinking it inside yourself, think back to the last really big hit your life took. Whether it was you didn't get the job that you applied for, you didn't get the right outcome with the diagnosis you were looking for, finances didn't go right, a big decision didn't fall in your direction. And just think about how all that felt, all of those emotions, all of the feelings of it. It's not the same that we're getting described here, because this one's pretty devastating. The story of Job, it's very hard to find a personal, contemporary example that says, I know someone who went through just something the same. But similar is super possible. And similar gets us a lot closer maybe to us, where we haven't felt the same experience, but we've certainly felt a similar experience. That is, I think, one of the things that will help us figure out what we're supposed to do with this. Because if you were going to look through the text of the Bible and say, hey, which ones are really positive and which ones are downers? Which ones are negative? Would Job go in the uplifting story or the big downer story, even with a great ending? I would say the downer story. The ending's great, but what about everybody else that was wrecked? And how is his heart whole? Like, it's got a Disney ending, all right, but there's a whole lot of skipping of him dealing with the grief of the loss. It goes from everything's gone, and then he got back more afterwards. My brain goes, how do you move forward having lost half of yourself with all of your first blessings of family gone? That's a second question that's inside the text, and we'll eventually have to swallow and process in different ways. I think it's similar to the trajectory of Judges, which just goes from like bad to incredibly horrible. I'm thankful that Ruth is the next book in the Bible, because that really is a much better story. But there are 3 people in this text that are serving more as a vision as how I would feel. I feel often more inclined to think like Job's friends than like God wants me to think, because we're looking for blame, and we want to blame the person who's in the middle of the problem rather than the problem or the world around us. I think that's a familiar spot where emotionally we live. And there are other Bible stories that help us recalibrate around all of this. So let's turn now into the text a little bit and just kind of pay attention to the first three chapters today, chapters 1, 2, and 3. Remember, it begins, a man from the land of Uz or Uz. His name's Job, blameless, upright, feared God, turned away from evil. Now, that's a really great short bio. If you're thinking like, hey, who else gets into that category in the Old Testament? And it's a super slim list. You get Noah, similar-ish. You get Daniel. By behavior alone, you could include Boaz. But you know who doesn't get included? Most of the kings, most of the patriarchs, large swaths of humanity aren't given this level of individual agency that's there in Job 1. And so again, he is our blameless man. By the way, that is similar-ish to how blameless is used in the New Testament in the descriptive terms for those who are shepherds. It doesn't mean without sin. It means that they are handling things in the way that God expects the human to handle it. Moving in a righteous way. Similar word. All right, so again, book opens up with this big description of whom Job is. And it starts so with a noun as opposed to a verb. Uncommon for grammar in Hebrew to start this way. This is not a normal Hebrew sentence. Nearly all of them start with either a verb form or a connective compound verb form, where there's an and then a verb. That's the grammar of Hebrew is making an adjustment here in the way that this is described. Because before we know about his personal theology or his suffering, we get to see his humanity. And again, these are those four words that show up in his description. Blameless, upright, fearing God, who turns from evil. All of those then are indicative of how we should think of him later. Because you note that when this story begins, this is how God also sees him. We don't have the broken theological conclusions of his friends. Their false doctrine isn't on the table. His sorrow and suffering isn't on the table as well. They really haven't shown the phrasing. And then one more word is going to occur here in the text that we haven't talked about that's kind of important. It's a word that is very Hebraic. Fancy term. Don't worry about it. You're going to learn this term really quickly. I've said this a couple of times in different contexts. Hebrew as a language is like stretchy silly putty in that it can mean a wider range of concepts than the precise language of Latin, Greek, or English as it's supposed to behave. And another example of that I use really quickly is super simple. This is a little more complicated. The Hebrew word hakal has two primary translations in our Bible. Primary translation number 1, temple. Primary translation number 2, palace. So the same word, hakal, is now used to refer to two similar-ish but very different things. And in context, we know what one is being employed by a very simple method. Who goes into the building? If the king goes in, it's rendered palace. It makes sense, right? And what kind of word is it translated into if a priest goes in? Temple. Like, it's not complicated, but it's the same word. We would use two different words. Latin uses two different words. Greek uses two separate words for this. Most languages do. Hebrew doesn't. It's a smaller vocabulary. This word here, Barak, means either cursed or blessed because of poetic and contextual uses. But are cursed and blessed the same thing? Absolutely not. But they're similar-ish because the origin and the outcomes may be divine. They may be working in a realm of otherworldly concepts. And the, again, originator of it, God. God can curse and bless. And he does. And inside the text, we get to see some of this as well. There's some poetry being employed here in ways that have some interesting usages. In this case, this is a phrase that's being employed as a deliberate euphemism. And so it's being used here deliberately to soften the impact of some of the terms. That's what a euphemism does. It takes a hard, more uncomfortable concept and makes it more polite. You use this all the time in life. The most well-known biblical euphemism is sleep. What's the underlying meaning when we say someone is sleeping in the Bible a lot of times? They're dead. How do they? They're really dead unless they're made alive again. Or sometimes the Bible will also say they were awoken. But it's a euphemism. It's not saying they're literally sleeping. It's saying they were asleep. And we know it means they were dead. And so Barak is using here in that way to describe this phrase. Now, all of that then is helping us see that this person, Job, from antiquity, is an ideal, righteous man. So much so that he is known eventually in the heavenly places, which is wild. Because some of the terminology that's employed there says that not just God knows who he is and where he is, but the devil does too. In this case, the phrase that's used there is the adversary. This is a great point in the Bible that helps us explain the different terms we use to describe this entity. So if I say the adversary, what other words do we know that entity by? The devil is one. What else? Lucifer is one that's common in public conversation. It's not the best translation of that word that's used there, but we apply it that way. So that's got to be the same thing, even though we may not be using all of those words in the ways that other people in the world use them. What else? Satan. And that's a really big one for this particular use, because you know what the Hebrew word for adversary is? You just said it. Satan. In Hebrew, if you want to sound fancy and everyone think you don't know what you're talking about, it's Satan. That's what that word is in Hebrew. The minute you say that, you sound dumb. So my advice to you is do not say that. Say Satan, because that's the colloquial Yankee edition. If you want to get more South Georgia, you got to grumble a little bit, get your voice about 2 octaves lower. It sounds more like Satan, or Satan, a little lower and deeper. My voice can't get that last octave down for the really South Georgian version of it. But same being. Also the serpent, the deceiver, the father of lies, the prince of lies, or other titles to the same entity. And I use entity here because we're not dealing with a person. We're not dealing with God. It is absolutely something else. Something that has otherworldly access and extraordinary existence. Because whatever this is lives a lot longer than I do right now. And God has dealt with him already. Because death has been defeated and so has he. Sentencing is just kind of on the clock, is the way that I think about it. So he's aware. And what's the accusation that we'll see towards this blameless man in a moment? You have made, what's the fancy word? A hedge. How many of you have ever been in a room where someone prayed for a hedge of protection around somebody? I've been there. The first time I heard it, I thought it was weird. Still doesn't fit into my vocabulary, but reading through Job, I can get it. The only problem I have with it is after reading through Job, the accusation is that's a hedge of protection. Like you put this hedge around it. And I'm just a little particular and persnickety sometimes about stuff like that. But I totally get the reason. And in fact, if you want to pray one around me and my family, I'm all for it. Go ahead. Absolutely. I'll take about 6 layers of hedge protection, 4 moats, and whatever other forces you can put around me. I'm all for it. But that's the context here, that his life is so notable because of his character that he becomes fit for accusation. Let's pick at this. Let's turn this circumstance around. I also want to point out a super important bit. We cannot look at Job and say, man, that's not me. Job as a historical witness and like a wisdom text is written for all of us. And I hope that your life hasn't and will never be super similar to his, but I can guarantee you will meet people who are walking through Job's experiences emotionally for the circumstances that surround them. And it can prepare your heart for the day that you talk to them or you think through it yourself and feel through it for yourself. Because it's written for all of us. It's in the corpus, the big box of the biblical text for reasons that are of great benefit to all of us. That fourfold discussion, by the way, that is in chapter 1 is brought up again a couple other times. If you'll notice in Job chapter 2, there's a repeat of the description. Job chapter 2 and verse 3. It says, "And the Lord said to Satan, have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless man, an upright man, who fears God and turns away from evil. He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason." Verse 8 is the counterpoint where it says it again. Considered my servant Job of chapter 1. What does it mean for God to personally vouch for someone in this heavenly courtroom, employing similar things to like the middle Psalms 95 through 99 have this heavenly courtroom context? What does it mean when you think about that? Because the follow-on question I have up there is actually the most important one. If God describes Job this way, which of those 4 testimonies of Job challenge us as people the most? Rich?
I think it's amazing, number one, that there's a conversation about a singular person between 2 entities that we struggle to fathom, right? So you've got a conversation happening in the spiritual world about a person who has a loyalty to one of them, right? So you've got that's kind of amazing to me that there's a conversation. And I guess your question regarding what does it say about Job? What does it say about God and Job? God has confidence in Job. And so as we've been studying, let's talk about this a little bit. As we've been studying prayer, Job has had conversations with God. And they know each other very well through prayer. And I think that's maybe where my offer him up as an example.
Yeah. There's backstory there. When I was thinking through this question, one of the things that came to mind was those moments when you go into a room and you step in and everyone stops talking. And what does our insecurity say? You guys talking about me? And sometimes our insecurity comes out with that exact sentence. And we're so insecure about that moment that we have to say it out loud. And then the same token, you've probably experienced this or done this. When someone comes up who's a close friend of yours, you do the whisper game. Oh, shh, he's here. Because all of that is a normal part of how we think about things. We are equally uncomfortable if someone's talking about us. And then we are amazed that they might be praising us in our absence. That's a human struggle with a divine court who knows us in ways that we haven't fathomed. Oh, and by the way, when Jesus would say in his public preaching that God knows the hairs of your head, this is the intertextual moment where he does. If you've got a relationship with God, and you're created, so you do, he knows you. He knows you at a level of competency and conviction that is surprisingly accurate to the human side of things. But in the divine drama that's playing out right here, think back to those 4 ideals, maybe over lunch today, maybe this week in prayer, and think about which one of those is there a dissonance taking place where the way you see yourself may be overly inflated or overly deflated in view of God. Where you think God may see you really highly, but maybe that's not accurate, etc. Bob?
Yeah, I think this is a 4th in-depth study of Job that I've been involved with. And I think we're kind of missing the other side of this, and that is the interaction between God and Satan, because in this we see that God is the one that's in control, and even controlling Satan is what he's doing to Job. And I think God has picked Job because Job is the only person that he knows that can handle what Satan's going to give to him.
I think there's fairness to that too. We actually get to some of that when we move forward to chapter 2.
I figured I was too early.
Yeah, no, you're good. You're good. I was trying to bury the lead, have the hook at the end. But you're right, and we can kind of slide that way. I also do want to point out, though, that Job is not a superhuman. Job is a person who is faithful before God, and the Bible is full of people who are faithful before God. And the imaging here is that we can be too. Because Job is never presented as perfect. He is presented as one who is standing righteously before God, blameless in light of God's expectations and his commitment to him. And he is able to withstand. The other balancing thing that would go with Bob's comment is the accommodative reading of how God tests us to the extent that we're able to endure. He knows. And he is going to work in his way to ensure that we are not crushed and broken by what the world and the devil could also do to those of us who are already carrying more than we can carry. Job rises early to offer sacrifices for the sins his children may have committed in their hearts. What does that priestly motive in him reveal about the connection between genuine worship and how we think about other people? Is Job's initiative there correct to offer sacrifice for people that may have sinned? Or do we get too self-focused and think that we can only go to God for us? The Old Testament is full of offering sacrifices for others. It's part of the interaction between the priests and the people around them. So in the context of the Hebrew Bible in the context of the world of the time until Christ, it's absolutely normal and expected to do that. You say, well, we have Christ now. Yeah, absolutely. So we got a better sacrifice, a better mediator, and a better path of intercession. Do you pray for other people? I do. I pray for my kids, my wife, my family. I pray for all of you. I pray for my extended family, my neighbors. I get a little bit nuclear because eventually I'll pay for the entire county, like, as far as I can think and see. Because I believe that that's something that God can do. And the motivation for it is rooted in what Job's doing here. He's like, maybe they don't know. And you frame your prayers that way, I know, because I hear them sometimes. You pray that someone will hear the gospel. You pray that someone's heart will open up. That's what you're doing. It's parallel in purpose. He's doing a different thing under a different law, but the purpose underneath it is paralleled. It's the same thing. This then goes to the section that Bob was fishing us into in his expedition early. Did I miss a question on one side? Yeah.
Well, no, I was just going to add on because like you even see an example of Jesus doing. We talked about it last week, Luke 22. He says that Satan has demanded to sift you like wheat.
Yeah.
Referring to Peter, and he says that I have prayed for you that your faith has not failed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's easy to think that we can't solve other people's problems, but there's nothing preventing us from.
Do you notice the angle there of, again, God praying, petitioning on behalf of a human to the Father? Like, this helps us see that, hey, if we're going to follow the imaging and example of Christ, what better example is there of Christ praying for others? He does it all the time. Like, not just that one time, but all the time. Super powerful model. And because a lot of our life is copying. I saw, so now I do. I'm going to copy this behavior because it's the right behavior to copy, to emulate, to imitate. All right, so this is this big scene in the heavenly court. A very familiar phrase that appears back in Genesis, appears here too. Genesis 6 through 9, this phrase appears a couple of times, which is in this edition of the translation, Sons of God. Beni Elohim. It's in parallel to the story of the Nephilim, which is some sort of interaction between the Beni Elohim and the daughters of men in the earlier stories of the Bible. So this event is taking place where those groupings of people, that phrase is being employed here in this heavenly court scene, and the accuser comes along. The Satan, or the Hastan, or Satan, the devil. He is, in this part of the biblical witness, far more mysterious than he will become. Most of our understanding of his attributes, character, and intent is revealed to us in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, we get bits and pieces of his role in things. He shows up in the creation story as the antagonist, causing chaos. He shows up in the poetic literature of the prophets. He is not distinctly referenced in most of the historical books. He's not given agency in those stories other than the broad world push. Most of the antagonists of the historical books of the Old Testament are the other gods. Whether it be the gods of Egypt, the water gods, and the sky gods, and the sun gods of the region around the Middle East. It is later in the experience of the Hebrews that he gets a little bit more mention. And so in this text of Job is one of our first really bits to flesh that out, to fill in that entity's real nature. And when Jesus starts describing it, and there's a dialogue with him a second time in the Gospels, That's when we get a fuller picture. It's not really fully revealed. And as the story is unfolding, it is God who speaks first. Verse 8, have you considered my servant Job? Verse 9, does Job fear God for nothing? The word nothing there means without cause, freely, or for no reason. That really is the central question of the book. Does he worship God freely, or because worship pays? If I worship God, he gives me good things. What's the best human illustration of that most of us learn about from age 0 to around, checking the age, about 10? I think everyone knows the answer to this secret question. I'm not going to ruin a certain holiday. If we behave well for this guy who wears a red coat, what does he supposedly give us? Gifts, if we've been good. And what does he know about our lives? Everything, whether it be bad or good. That's the story that we're told. And it's a story. And it's got some great familial connections to it, some heritage. It amalgamates a bunch of similar stories from Western Europe. It sells Coca-Cola, the first users of it. It sells Hasbro and all kinds of other stuff too. And then as adults, we play the same game with each other, and it sells stuff for us out of the adult price level because we want to give people things. Like we need an excuse, so we make it up. But the theology of it is the accusation that Satan makes. You're getting it because you're good. And only doing it because you want the outcome. The text will then explain to us very quickly how Job's character rises to the occasion of this challenge because God sees. He is competent and capable. And if you note this begins in verse 20 of chapter 1. This is where that phrase that you've probably heard quoted before emanates from. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised. If there's a hard phrase in the Bible to digest on a human level, when things are bad, it's that one. It's super easy if things are great, right? If the emotional scales are in the heavy blessing category and you haven't had a catastrophe in the last 6, 12, 18 months or years, does this passage feel the same if you've never heard before? No, because there's no weight to it. You haven't experienced the drag across the concrete that the other end of the equation is. And this is coming now as he's getting drug across the concrete, and this is how he comes forth. So again, does God know him? Pretty sure he does. And you got to think for a minute, how does one prepare yourself to respond like Job does when calamity occurs like Job has?
Sometimes you got to get drug across the concrete.
Sometimes it's because you've already experienced it. Like I've already been. Like I know what it's like to be knocked out. It's not that bad. It's actually a nice nap. Like literally, that's like my feeling about it. Do I want to be? Not really. I don't want to get hit by things in the way in which the outcome is I get knocked to the floor again. But it happened when I was in elementary school. It happened a couple times in high school. It's happened as an adult. I'd rather avoid the circumstance. But it's not that, I'm not terrified by it. Emotionally and spiritually, there are certain circumstances that don't faze me in that way that they did the first time. And the same thing is true for you. I have a little note in here. I was talking to my friend Adam Bernhardt when he was teaching his kids to drive. And this is up in Tennessee. A lot less cars around in Middle Tennessee, especially out where his house is. And he would get them out on the back road. There's a certain spot on the back road where he would grab the steering wheel and pull them into the edge of the ditch. So they're one set of tires on one side are in the dirt, and the other set of tires on the inside line are still on the concrete, to teach them how to get their car back up on the concrete like it was supposed to in a completely safe environment, because it's all flat dairyland out there, ain't nothing to worry about, no other cars to hit, they're not going to flip the thing, they're going at a moderate pace. But he wouldn't tell them that he was doing that. And so he just grabbed the steering wheel. Kids freaked out. You can check with my children. I may or may not have done the same thing in certain circumstances. But there's this little corner road over here coming back from the middle school. It's a perfect right-hand turn that you have to learn how to get out of the dirt on. And all three of the kids have been through that experience. Because once you realize it's not that big of a deal, okay, all I got to do is just kind of slow down and pop back up off of the curb and I'll be okay. That is in part how some spiritual things occur to train us to be successful in the future. And when someone else goes off the rails, we get to be a witness for them. Hey, I was right there in something like this. And I know it's tough. And I know it's hard. Here are some of the things I've learned that made it so that I could turn back. So somewhere in the past witness of Job, there's some training, there's some experience, there's some mentoring, there's some encouragement. There's a deep level of commitment to who God is so he can reach the point that God sees him this way. So the tragedy that he encounters is one that he will trust his way through. It says in the text, verse 22, in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. In the round 2, which is verses 1 through 10, Satan presses further and says, in essence, skin for skin. A man will give anything for his physical life, touch his body, and then he will renounce you. Job is then struck with painful sores from the foot all the way to the top of his head. He's sitting there in ashes, scraping himself with the broken edge of a pot. His wife then echoes the mindset of the adversary. Curse God and die. Again, Job's reply, shall we accept good from God and not trouble? And once again, he does not sin. The statement of the devil, of Satan, is that all piety is transactional. All religious action is transactional. I didn't know it, but I was having my first theological debate with my friend in my truck in high school, where he was arguing that believers, Christians in particular, are just weaker than atheists because they couldn't handle things without God. They needed God to explain whatever ridiculous thing we were talking about. Like, we were 17. I'm sure it wasn't a really smart discussion. But his point is no different than the picture we're seeing here that the devil is offering. You're only worshiping God because there's a transaction that favors you in the equation here. Job's response effectively answers the question. But how does it do that? How is his balanced reply answer to this question of God? About God, that is. Rich?
Are we just a fair weather God's order.
Yeah. Your faith is manifest and magnified in your weakness. And if you think about that, that's what Paul says. We just don't like it. We don't want to have the testimony of our faith be at our most bare and weak parts of our life. We want to be seen as strong, zealous, outspoken, faithful in all things. I noticed this in the writing of a couple of guys who were well-known theologians who have passed away in the last couple of years. And they had a similar statement along the lines of the things we panic over when they disappear are usually what we trust the most. With a hard question underneath that, I think that's true. Would you agree that's a truism? How many of you panic if you leave the house without your phone and turn back around? There's no way I'm the only one. The faces are not matching reality. Many of us turn right back around and go get our phone for reasons of phone. How about your wallet? How long can you go throughout your day without your wallet?
You can drive with that.
You're going to have some problems. You get pulled over if you don't have your phone or your wallet. You can probably get away in Georgia right now with showing your digital ID if you have it on there, but it's still not a true valid representation of your license in Georgia just yet. So you're going to have some problems. There's going to be some consequences to that. There might be something else. You go on a vacation, there's something you got to have. Look, if I was traveling anywhere and didn't bring my CPAP with me, we'd have some problems. That overnight experience would not be good for anybody at all, right? Because I trust it to give my family and myself the knowledge that I'll be sleeping well and quietly. Like that's most important. This is the second half of that, I think. If we trust it the most, when it disappears, we panic the most. That's where our trust is in that context. The hard thing is to acknowledge that to the extent, if I'm on the ash heap and it's gone, what am I doing now? In 1999, the entirety of my burgeoning sermon and writing archive died on a Seagate hard drive. There's 200 sermons that I had generated in my life up to that point that no longer exist. I thought they were wonderful. I will tell you they were probably bad. But I was broken as a gatherer of my brain's output. To the point now, I've got multiple copies of everything everywhere. Like my backups have backups. And a lot of those early sermons are still bad. But I hope I wouldn't be as broken by it being gone. But I'll put a beat down. Too much trust in that and not enough in other parts of what was truly important. We got a minute, and this is intentional. The best part of his friend's behavior is spent in the first few days with him. I didn't say a word. It's not that you can't say something when someone is struggling. It's that sometimes in the things that we say that try to help, they're not doing that. And I have this little bit I want to include here. Have you ever seen someone struggling and you go to them and you say, hey, if you need anything, let me know. I've said that. You guys say something like that? I didn't realize this until I started putting the pieces together a little bit. When someone is really suffering and I say that phrase, what I'm actually doing is putting more weight on them. Because I am asking them, who are already carrying a lot of weight, to figure out what they need and tell it to me so I can do it for them. You know what's a better model? See a need, fill a need. You see someone struggling? That's right. Amen to the machine. It's the first time I ever get to use that. Not sure I'll be able to use it again. You see someone struggling and they're not being able to mow their lawn, just go mow their lawn. They're having a rough time, and you're thinking they may not be able to handle getting all the groceries and stuff ready for their family's meal. Drop off a meal. You don't always need a list. It's totally the same outcome, except you're taking two weights off of them, the task and the weight to ask. Because guess what? How many people that you have said that to follow up with, here's the list. This is the list of things I need done. Far fewer than the needs exist. Just go do something. Even if you're not quite sure what to do, just give them a phone call, say, hey, how you doing? Break the rules of, well, I got to contact them at the right time, the right place. No, you don't. Just say, hey. It's not that complicated. That's the part of the behavior of Joe's friend that's the best. I'm sorry I went over time a little bit. I don't think it's the end of the world, but it is what it is. So we'll continue with the study.